When a lonely, broke old man sees his black ex-girlfriend on TV, now a billionaire returning to the same town he never left, something inside him snaps. All his failures, all his regrets, suddenly feel like her fault. And when he hears she visits a local cafe every morning, he doesn't just plan to confront her, he plans to punish her. But the moment he lifts his hand, everything shatters. Her peace, his future, and the lie he's been living for 30 years. What happens next isn't about rage. It's about what a man does when the whole town watches him fall, and whether a community wounded by hate can ever find healing in truth. The morning show's cheerful music filled Walt's cramped living room as he slouched deeper into his threadbare recliner. Coffee stains marked the armrests where his trembling hands had missed his mouth over the years. The TV volume was too loud, his hearing wasn't what it used to be after Desert Storm. But the neighbors had stopped complaining months ago. His eyes fixed on the pile of overdue bills scattered across his coffee table. Electric, phone, medical expenses he couldn't begin to pay. Each envelope marked in red, final notice. And now we're thrilled to welcome an extraordinary woman who started as a small-town nurse and built a healthcare empire. The host's voice caught Walt's attention. The coffee mug slipped from his fingers when he saw her face. Simone Brooks. Her elegant grey-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun, pearl earrings catching the studio lights. That same gentle smile he remembered from 30 years ago. "Miss Brooks, your company revolutionized rural healthcare logistics and now you're worth over $2 billion, the host gushed. What's your secret? Simone's laugh was warm and genuine. No secret, just faith, hard work, and refusing to let others define my worth. Walt's chest tightened. The same woman who used to share coffee with him at the diner counter now sat in a designer suit, talking about billions like they were pennies. His hands curled into fists. "And you're returning to your hometown?" the host asked. "Yes, I believe in remembering where you came from. Some of my happiest memories are from that little cafe where I waited tables to pay for nursing school." The old factory whistle echoed in Walt's mind. The day they laid off half the town. He'd found Simone crying in the break room at the hospital. She'd just been accepted to business school, but couldn't afford to go. He'd promised to help, to stand by her. Empty words now. Walt pushed himself up from the recliner, his bad knee protesting. He limped to the window, staring at the boarded-up factory across the street. The same factory where he'd stayed silent when the guys made jokes about Simone, where he'd looked away when they left those notes in her locker, where he'd chosen fitting in over standing up. "What about the people who doubted you?" the host was asking. "I learned that bitterness is a choice," Simone answered. "So is grace." Walt grabbed his jacket and stormed out, letting the screen door slam behind him. The morning air was sharp, with autumn chill. As he walked past the abandoned factory buildings, their broken windows like accusing eyes, his footsteps echoed off empty loading docks where trucks once lined up for miles. Outside Ruth's cafe, the regulars were already gathering. Walt hung back in the shadow of the old hardware store listening. "Did you see Simone on TV?" Betty Chen, the retired librarian, asked. "She always stops here first thing when she's in town. Ruth says she never misses a sunrise coffee." "Same booth every time," Tom from the post office added. "Says it reminds her where she started." Walt's jaw clenched. All these years, he'd told himself she'd gotten lucky, that the world had handed her everything while leaving him with nothing. But watching her on that screen, poised, successful, strong, forced him to face a harder truth. She'd built something while he'd nursed grievances. Back home, he paced his kitchen until midnight, the linoleum creaking under each step. The old photo of Simone sat on his counter, them at the county fair, her head thrown back, laughing at some forgotten joke. He'd kept it all these years, a reminder of what? Love? Or his own failure? His hand found the heavy metal flashlight in the drawer. "For protection," he muttered, though he knew it was a lie. He slipped it into his jacket pocket, its weight like lead against his heart. Setting his alarm for 5, Walt stared at the photo one last time. In the yellow kitchen light, his reflection overlaid Simone's smiling face. His features twisted with an anger that had eaten 30 years of his life. Tomorrow, he decided, she'd answer for his wasted chances. Tomorrow she'd know what it felt like to lose everything. But as he turned out the light, A small voice deep inside whispered that the only one responsible for his losses was staring back from the dark window. He silenced it with practiced ease, letting rage win over conscience one more time. The pre-dawn air bit through Walt's jacket as he lurked in the shadows across from Ruth's cafe. His breath came out in small white puffs, matching the rhythm of his pounding heart. 5:55 in the morning, and his fingers kept brushing against the cold metal flashlight in his pocket. "Just gonna talk to her?" he muttered, though the words rang hollow even to his own ears. "Just want some answers." Warm light spilled onto the sidewalk as Ruth Alvarez unlocked the front door. Her silver hair caught the glow from the cafe windows where the "open" sign flickered to life. The smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls drifted across the empty street. Walt watched Ruth bustle inside, humming to herself, completely unaware of his presence. Minutes crawled by. Early regulars started trickling in, the veterans' table filling up first, then the hospital shift workers grabbing quick breakfasts. Walt's hands had gone numb from the cold, but he barely noticed. At 6:20, a sleek black car pulled up. Walt's throat tightened as Simone Brooks stepped out. She looked different from the polished businesswoman on TV, simpler, wearing a camel coat over what looked like workout clothes, her grey-streaked hair in a neat bun. A travel mug dangled from her fingers as she reached back into the car for her purse. Walt moved without thinking. His feet carried him across the street, hood still pulled low over his face. Simone was fumbling with her keys, didn't see him coming. The rage he'd been nursing exploded through him like a fever breaking. The metal flashlight felt heavy in his hand. Too heavy. Wrong, but it was too late. The sound of the impact seemed to echo off every building. Simone crumpled with a soft cry of surprise, her coffee mug shattering on the sidewalk. The dark liquid spread like a stain across the concrete, steam rising in the cold morning air. Someone screamed. Multiple voices shouted. The world seemed to stop, caught in amber, as Walt stared down at what he'd done. Simone lay curled on her side, one hand pressed to her temple. Blood trickled between her fingers. Her eyes were open, conscious but glazed with pain and shock. The rage drained from Walt so fast it left him dizzy. Horror crashed over him like ice water as the full weight of his actions slammed home. The flashlight clattered from his nerveless fingers. "Oh God," he choked out. His knees gave way and he collapsed to the sidewalk. With trembling hands, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "I need help," he sobbed into the phone. "I hurt her. I hurt Simone Brooks. Please send help to Ruth's cafe on Main Street. I'm staying right here. I did it. I hit her. Please hurry." Ruth burst out of the cafe door, dish towels clutched in her hands. She dropped to her knees beside Simone, pressing the clean white cloth against the wound while speaking soft, soothing words. Other patrons surrounded them, some calling out medical experience, others filming with their phones. Walt stayed on, his knees still clutching his phone, tears streaming down his face. When police cruisers screamed up minutes later, he put his hands behind his head without being asked. "I'm Walt Harlan," he said as they cuffed him. "I did it. I'll tell you everything." He watched them load Simone carefully into an ambulance, Ruth climbing in beside her. The last thing he saw before they put him in the back of a police car was the growing crowd of onlookers, phones raised high, capturing every moment of his shame for the whole world to see. The evening light had faded to purple through the hospital room window. Simone lay propped up on white pillows, her face bruised but her eyes clear. Ruth sat in a chair on one side of the bed, while Pastor Elaine Mercer stood on the other, their hands joined in prayer over Simone's blanket-covered form. A detective knocked softly and entered, his face grave. "Ms. Brooks, I hate to interrupt, but there's something you should know. The video of the attack has gone viral. Your board of directors is blowing up my phone. They're insisting you leave town immediately." Simone closed her eyes briefly, pain flickering across her features that had nothing to do with her injuries. "Thank you, Detective," she said quietly. "Please tell them I'll be in touch soon." The room fell silent again except for Ruth and Pastor Elaine's whispered prayers, while outside the story of what happened at the cafe that morning raced across screens around the country. The county jail's harsh fluorescent lights made Walt's eyes burn. He sat on the thin mattress of his holding cell, his hands trembling as the morning's events played over and over in his mind like a horror film he couldn't stop. The sound of Simone hitting the pavement, the spilled coffee spreading dark across the concrete, The screams. His own voice cracked and desperate, telling the 911 operator what he'd done. Across town at Memorial Hospital, Simone Brooks opened her eyes to sunlight filtering through vertical blinds. Her left side ached, and she winced as she tried to shift position. Every time footsteps echoed in the hallway, she flinched, her heart racing before settling again. A paper cup of water sat untouched on the bedside table. Ice, long since melted. Detective Sarah Martinez knocked softly before entering. "Miss Brooks, I know you're tired, but we need your statement while the details are fresh." Simone nodded, her neat bun now disheveled. "I remember everything clearly." Her voice was steady despite the bruising on her face. "The man who attacked me is Walt Harlan. We dated 40 years ago before I left for nursing school." The detective's pen moved across her notepad. "And you're certain about the identification?" "Absolutely certain." Simone's hands were clasped tightly in her lap. "I want every detail documented, not because I want vengeance, but because the truth matters. What happened this morning wasn't just about me." By mid-morning, Walt found himself in courtroom 3 of the county courthouse. His court-appointed attorney stood beside him as the prosecutor addressed Judge Helen Chen. "Your Honor, given the circumstances and the viral nature of the video evidence, the state is considering hate crime enhancements to the charges." The prosecutor's words echoed in the nearly empty courtroom. The defendant's prior relationship with the victim adds a concerning dimension to what appears to be a targeted attack. Walt's eyes found Simone sitting in the back row, flanked by Ruth and Pastor Elaine. Before his attorney could stop him, words spilled out. "I'm sorry, God, I'm so sorry." "Mr. Harlan," Judge Chen's voice cracked like a whip, "you will not address the victim directly. Another outburst will result in immediate removal from this courtroom." In the courthouse hallway after the hearing, Ruth Alvarez met with Marcus Thompson, head of Simone's security team. Her usual warm smile was replaced by worry lines as she revealed what few in town knew. "Simone wasn't just visiting," Ruth explained, her voice low. "She's been negotiating to buy the whole block where my cafe sits. The bank's about to foreclose, and that old factory district." She shook her head. She had plans drawn up to turn it into something beautiful. A veterans and seniors wellness center. Free medical clinics, hot meals, job training programs. The cafe was supposed to be the heart of it all. Marcus leaned against the wall, rubbing his temples. And now, the whole project might collapse because one angry man couldn't let go of the past. "It's worse than that," Ruth said. "Half the veterans in town get their coffee at my place every morning. Walt used to be one of them. He attacked the very person trying to help people just like him." The afternoon sun slanted through Simone's hospital window as she took the video call from her board of directors. Their faces filled the screen of her tablet, concern and frustration evident in their expressions. "The optics are terrible, Simone," said Gerald, the board chairman. "We need you on the first flight out tomorrow morning. The project can be relocated. Your safety has to come first." Simone closed her eyes, her lips moving in silent prayer. When she opened them again, determination had replaced the fatigue on her face. "I understand your concerns," she said carefully, "but I won't make this decision from a place of fear. Give me 48 hours to see how this community responds. Whether they turn toward healing or toward hate will tell me everything I need to know." She ended the call and looked out at the town spread below her window. The cafe district, the empty factory buildings, all the places that needed light. The bruises throbbed, but her spirit remained unbroken. Ruth slipped into the room with a fresh cup of tea. "You don't have to stay," she said softly. "No one would blame you for leaving." Simone wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "Maybe not, but sometimes the hardest place to stand is exactly where you're meant to be." The fluorescent lights in the jail's processing area hummed like angry wasps. Walt's hands trembled as he signed the release papers, his eyes darting to the small TV mounted in the corner. There he was again, his own rage-twisted face, replaying on the national news, the words "hate crime in small-town America" scrolling beneath. "Dad," the voice cut through him like ice. Kendra stood in the doorway, her arms crossed tight against her chest. Her brown hair was pulled back severe and neat, the way her mother used to wear it. The disappointment in her eyes made Walt feel small. "Kendra, don't." She stepped forward to sign the final papers. "I'm only here because this whole mess is already bringing too much attention to our family. Tommy doesn't need his classmates knowing his grandfather is—" She stopped, jaw clenching. Walt's heart squeezed at the mention of his grandson. "How is he?" He's 8, Dad. He's confused and scared because people are sharing that horrible video everywhere. Kendra's voice cracked. What were you thinking? Actually, don't answer that. I don't want to know what kind of hate lives in your head. They walked to her car in silence. The drive home felt endless, streetlights casting shadows across Walt's face as shame settled heavy in his stomach. When they pulled up to his small house, Kendra kept the engine running. Until you get real help and show real change, you stay away from Tommy. No calls, no visits, nothing. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I mean it, Dad. I won't let him learn your kind of anger. The door clicked shut behind him like a judge's gavel. Walt stood in his driveway, watching his daughter's taillights disappear around the corner. The night air felt too thin to breathe. Inside, his house was dark and stale. Old coffee cups lined the counter, yesterday's bills still scattered across the coffee table. Everything looked exactly the same, but nothing felt right anymore. The walls seemed to press in, witnesses to decades of bitterness he'd let poison his heart. Walt sank into his recliner but couldn't settle. His hands kept reaching for justifications. She surprised me. I didn't mean to. The world's too different now. But each excuse tasted like ashes in his mouth. In the hall closet, behind a stack of old Desert Storm photos, sat a shoebox he hadn't opened in years. His fingers found it without thinking. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a silver charm bracelet. $9 from the drugstore, but Simone had worn it like fine jewelry. Beneath it, a photograph, him and Simone outside Ruth's cafe, summer of '85. Her smile lit up the whole image. His younger self looked proud to stand beside her. The contrast between then and now hit him like a physical blow. Walt's chest heaved as tears finally broke through, not the defensive ones from the courthouse, but deep, racking sobs that bent him double in his chair. What had he become? What had he done? When the crying subsided, Walt's hand shook as he reached for his phone. He scrolled to the church number Pastor Elaine had given him years ago after his wife's funeral. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Pastor Elaine? His voice sounded strange in the quiet house. This is Walt Harlan. I did something terrible. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I need help. Please. He hung up before his voice could break again. Across town, Simone winced as she settled into a hotel armchair, careful of her bruised side. The doctor's discharge instructions lay on the nightstand, next to a paper cup of Ruth's chicken soup. 2 security guards stood post in the hallway, a surreal reminder of how much had changed since yesterday morning. Ruth sat perched on the edge of the bed, her kind face lined with worry. The cafe will always be your safe place, honey. Whether you decide to stay or go, we'll stand with you. Simone's eyes filled with tears. I believed in this town once. I want to believe again. Back in his kitchen, Walt pulled out a sheet of paper and an old pencil. His hand trembled as he wrote 3 words. I did something evil. The truth of it kept him awake all night, staring at the ceiling as his conscience finally spoke louder than his pride. The morning sun filtered through stained glass, casting colored light across Pastor Elaine's office. Walt sat stiffly in a wooden chair, his hands clasped tight enough to whiten his knuckles. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. Pastor Elaine studied him with kind but unwavering eyes. Walt, before you say anything, I want to be clear. This is a space for truth, not excuses. Walt's rehearsed words died in his throat. He nodded, shoulders slumping. Good, she said, folding her hands on her desk. Now real change starts with accepting what you did. Not what happened to you, not how you felt, but what you chose to do. Walt's voice cracked. I hurt her. I was wrong. Yes, you were. Pastor Elaine's voice remained gentle but firm. And remorse without repair is just feeling sorry for yourself. Are you ready to hear what real accountability looks like? When Walt nodded again, she laid out the requirements. You'll need to plead guilty in court. Enter counseling, not just anger management, but bias training too. If Simone agrees, there may be a supervised community service option. But understand, this isn't about making you feel better. It's about protecting others and proving change is possible. Across town, Simone sat straight-backed in her hotel room, facing her laptop screen. The faces of her board members and major donors filled the video grid, their expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed anger. This is a PR nightmare, one donor said. The optics alone. With respect, Simone interrupted quietly. This isn't about optics. There are veterans sleeping in their cars, seniors choosing between medicine and meals. They need this center. But surely another location. Another board member started. No. Simone touched her bruised cheek gently. I won't. Let one man's hatred determine where help is needed. These people matter more than fear. Ruth's cafe provided sanctuary that afternoon. She had gathered a small group of trusted community leaders, including Mike Thompson, a Vietnam veteran who ran the local support group. Ma'am, Mike said to Simone, his weathered face sincere, what you're planning here, it's needed, bad, and some of us old-timers will stand with you. Meanwhile, Walt sat in a sterile office across town, sweat beading on his forehead as a counselor asked pointed questions about his prejudices and anger triggers. The intake form felt like a mirror he couldn't avoid. When did you first notice these patterns of thinking? The counselor asked. Walt stared at his hands. I guess I always blamed others for my problems. Easier than looking at myself. The counselor nodded and handed him a blank journal. Write everything down, the truth, not the story you tell yourself. We'll meet in group every Tuesday. As evening settled over the town, Simone stood outside Ruth's cafe, her security team hovering nearby. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the door handle. The bell chimed as she entered. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Coffee cups froze halfway to lips. The silence felt heavy enough to touch. Ruth moved from behind the counter, steady, as always. Welcome back, Simone, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Your usual table is waiting. Simone drew a deep breath, straightening her spine. Thank you, Ruth. Her voice was quiet, but clear. I won't be chased away. She took her seat by the window, the same spot where she'd sat decades ago as a young woman with dreams. The other patrons gradually returned to their conversations, but something had shifted. A choice had been made, a line drawn in the sand of their small-town soul. At that same moment, Walt sat at his kitchen table, opening the blank journal. The first page stared back at him, waiting for truth. His hand shook as he began to write, knowing the hardest work was just beginning. Saturday dawned crisp and clear over Ruth's cafe, but the morning air felt heavy with whispers. Inside, the regulars huddled closer than usual, their coffee cups forming tight, circles on worn tabletops. Some spoke in harsh whispers about that woman, who should just leave town, while others muttered that Walt Harlan deserved worse than jail. A few just stirred their coffee endlessly, eyes down, wishing it would all go away. Ruth Alvarez moved between tables with practiced grace, her silver hair neat under her favorite blue bandana. She'd seen enough summers in this town to know how fear could turn neighbors against each other. Without fanfare, she taped a hand-lettered sign by the register, "Kindness lives here." Simple words, but they made several customers shift in their seats. At 8:30, Walt's weathered truck pulled into the lot. He sat for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, then walked to the door with shoulders hunched against the morning chill. But before he could reach for the handle, Ruth stepped outside. Walt. Her voice was gentle but firm. You can't come in right now. His face flushed. Ruth, I just want to apologize. To who? She crossed her arms. Simone isn't here, and if she was, you know you're not allowed near her. That's not your right anymore. Walt's shoulders sagged. I need to do something, Ruth, anything. Ruth studied him for a long moment. You want to help? That ramp needs fixing. She pointed to the wooden wheelchair ramp that ran alongside the cafe. Steps. Mrs. Chen nearly fell yesterday. It's not safe for our seniors anymore. Walt walked over and knelt to examine the worn boards. I can fix this. Today. There's tools in the shed out back. And Walt? He looked up. Real change happens in the quiet moments when nobody's watching. For the next several hours, Walt worked steadily. He removed rotted boards, reinforced joints, and added non-slip strips. The work was good for his hands, though his thoughts were harder to control. Every time the door chimed, he felt eyes on his back. Some folks walked past quickly, while others lingered to watch, trying to decide if this was just for show. Across town, in a small community center meeting room, Simone sat with a circle of local veterans and seniors. She wore a simple blue sweater, and her usual elegant bun was looser today. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed her fatigue, but her attention never wavered as people shared their needs. My Arthur can't drive anymore, said Eleanor Matthews, age 78. Getting to doctor appointments is impossible some months. The VA clinic's an hour away, added James Miller, a Vietnam veteran. Lots of guys just skip appointments they can't reach. Simone took careful notes, asking questions about specific challenges. What if we had a shuttle service, and maybe visiting nurses, for basic checkups right here in town? You mean that's really happening? Eleanor leaned forward. The wellness center? Yes, ma'am. Simone's voice was steady. We'll start with medical transport and meal support, then add job training programs, especially for veterans transitioning to civilian work. But after what happened, James trailed off. Simone met his eyes. This isn't about what happened to me. It's about what this community needs. I'm here to listen and serve, nothing more. Back at the cafe, the afternoon sun cast long shadows as Walt secured the last board. His back ached, but the ramp was solid now, with a proper grade and sturdy handrails. Ruth appeared with a glass of water, keeping a careful distance as she set it on the steps. It's good work, she said, studying the repairs. Walt wiped his forehead. Least I could do. Repair is slow, Walt. Ruth's words were measured. But it starts with showing up day after day, doing what needs doing. Later that evening, Simone sat alone in her hotel room, reviewing her notes from the community meeting. A police siren wailed suddenly outside, and she flinched hard, dropping her pen. Her hand trembled as she reached for her phone and dialed Pastor Elaine's number. Pastor? Her voice wavered slightly. Would you pray with me? Just for strength to keep going. The gentle sound of Pastor Elaine's voice filled the quiet room, speaking words of comfort and courage, while outside the town settled into an uneasy dusk, waiting to see what tomorrow might bring. The church bells chimed 7 times as morning sunlight filtered through stained glass windows. Pastor Elaine stood at the pulpit, her silver hair catching the light, her eyes scanning the fuller-than-usual congregation. Today, she began, her voice warm but firm, we talk about the difference between saying sorry and being sorry, between forgiveness and trust, between hiding from truth and facing it. Near the back door, Simone sat quietly in a simple brown hat and cream scarf. Her bruises were fading but still visible. 2 rows behind her, Walt hunched in the last pew, his work-worn hands clasped tightly in his lap. Confession without change is just noise, Pastor Elaine continued. And trust? That's earned slowly, step by step, choice by choice. The wooden pews creaked as people shifted uncomfortably. Some turned to stare at Walt, others whispered behind bulletins. Ruth sat in her usual spot, 3rd row center, straight-backed and focused on the sermon. After the final hymn, Pastor Elaine called for those willing to stay. She explained the restorative justice process, structured meetings, strict rules about distance and communication, trained mediators to guide difficult conversations. This isn't about forcing fellowship, she said. It's about doing the harder work of real healing. He should be in jail, someone called out. We don't want that kind of program here, another voice added. The tension thickened until Jack Martinez, a Vietnam veteran with a silver mustache, stood up slowly using his cane. My wife needs that wellness center, he said. My buddies need those services. Are we going to let pride steal something good from folks who need help? 3 more veterans stood. Then an elderly woman who could barely walk. Then Ruth, silent but resolute. Outside, autumn wind rustled yellow leaves across the church steps. Walt watched Simone speaking with the mediator, a kind-faced woman named Sarah. His feet carried him forward before he caught himself, stopping at the agreed-upon distance. His hands trembled. Ma'am, he said to Sarah, voice rough. If I wrote a letter, could you make sure it gets delivered proper, following all the rules? Sarah nodded, explaining the process for reviewing and delivering written communication. Before she finished, Kendra's voice cut through the crisp air. Dad! Walt turned to face his daughter. She looked tired, angry, hurt. Tommy saw you on the news, she said. He asked why Grandpa was hurting. Someone. He's 7 years old, Dad. 7. Her voice cracked. And don't you dare use church as an easy way out. Don't you dare act like saying sorry fixes this. Walt's shoulders sagged. For once he didn't argue or explain or defend. I was wrong, he said simply. Nothing more. That night, Walt sat at his kitchen table with paper and pen. The only sound was his breathing and the scratch of writing. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He named what he did, why it was wrong, the harm he caused, the trust he broke. When finished, he sealed it carefully in an envelope for the mediator. Across town in her hotel room, Simone touched the fading bruises on her hands. Every car door outside made her jump. But she straightened her spine and reviewed her statement for tomorrow's court hearing. She would speak truth about the harm. She would set clear boundaries, and she would not let fear stop what needed to be built here. The moon rose over the quiet town, over the cafe with its new ramp, over the empty factory waiting to become something better. In the darkness, two people who once loved each other now faced the harder work of truth. One writing his confession, one preparing to speak with both courage and boundaries. The courthouse loomed grey against the morning sky as Walt entered through security. His hands trembled as he removed his belt and keys. The metal detector beeped anyway. His racing heart felt like steel in his chest. The courtroom smelled of wood polish and anxiety. Walt's court-appointed lawyer stood beside him, papers rustling. The fluorescent lights made everything look harsh and unforgiving. "All rise," called the bailiff. Judge Martinez settled into her chair, glasses perched low on her nose as she reviewed the case file. "Mr. Harlan, you understand the charges against you?" "Yes, Your Honor." Walt's voice came out rough. "And you wish to enter a plea at this time?" "Guilty, Your Honor." The word fell heavy in the quiet room. The prosecutor stood, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, given the circumstances, the clear racial motivation, the viral nature of the attack and its impact on our community, the state recommends maximum sentencing." Walt stared at his hands, weathered and calloused. The same hands that had once held Simone's, then betrayed her trust decades later. When Simone rose to speak, the room seemed to hold its breath. Her bruises had faded to yellow-green, but she held herself carefully, like someone learning to trust their own body again. "I want to be very clear," she began, her voice steady. "What happened to me was an attack. It was violent. It was fueled by hatred." She described the morning in detail. The crack of impact, the smell of spilled coffee, the cold ground, the watching eyes. "I still flinch when doors slam. I check every parking lot twice. That fear is real, and I won't minimize it to make others comfortable." Walt's shoulders hunched with each word, but he forced himself to keep listening. "However," Simone continued, "I'm not here seeking vengeance. I'm here seeking change. Real, measurable change that serves this community." She outlined her request: mandatory counseling, supervised service at the wellness center, strict boundaries, and regular check-ins with the court. "This isn't about being nice," she emphasized. "This is about turning harm into healing, not just for me, but for the veterans and seniors who need this center to survive." The judge considered, tapping her pen. "Mr. Harlan, are you prepared to accept these terms? They will be strictly enforced." Walt stood. "Yes, Your Honor. I'll do whatever's required." The terms were read aloud: weekly anger management and bias awareness counseling, 200 hours of supervised community service at the wellness center site, monthly restorative justice meetings, and absolute compliance with the no-contact order, except during structured mediation. "You will surrender any weapons," the judge added, "and you'll report to your probation officer tomorrow morning. One violation, Mr. Harlan, and you face immediate jail time. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor, I understand." After court adjourned, Walt watched Simone speak with a group of suited men in the hallway. Their voices carried something about pulled funding and reputation risks. "Ms. Brooks, be reasonable," one man insisted. "This situation is toxic. Leave now. Preserve the company's image." Simone's spine straightened. "What's toxic? Is abandoning people who need help. Because one man chose violence, I won't do it. Find another solution or find another CEO." Later that evening, Walt reported to the old factory site as required. The faded Midwest Manufacturing sign hung crooked above the entrance, a ghost from better days. The security guard checked his ID and paperwork twice before letting him in. Inside, fluorescent work lights cast harsh shadows across empty floors where he'd once operated machinery. A supervisor handed him work gloves and a broom. "Start with the West Wing," she said. "Everything needs to be cleared before renovation can begin." Walt gripped the broom handle, staring at decades of dust and debris. The work ahead felt impossible, like trying to sweep away years of mistakes. But as he began pushing the broom across concrete, something shifted in his understanding. This wasn't just punishment. This was a chance to help build something new from the wreckage he'd created. He worked steadily, dust clouds rising in the beam of work lights. Each stroke of the broom felt like both penance and possibility. The wellness center would rise here, not because he deserved redemption, but because others deserved care. The factory's shadow stretched long across the parking lot as dawn broke over the renovation site. Walt's boots crunched on gravel as he approached the chain-link fence, tool belt heavy against his hip. The security guard Mike checked his ID with the same thoroughness as yesterday. Inside, the work crew was gathering near a cluster of metal folding chairs. There was Jenny, a young mum who volunteered between childcare shifts, Tom and Carlos, both Vietnam-era vets who kept to themselves, and Marcus, a Desert Storm veteran like Walt, but 20 years younger. The site supervisor handed out assignments. West Wing needs all the old shelving stripped out today. Work in pairs, safety first. Marcus nodded toward Walt. You know your way around this place, right? Let's tackle that back corner. They worked steadily, the rhythm of dismantling metal shelves filling the silence. Dust motes danced in shafts of morning light streaming through grimy windows. Served Desert Storm 2, Marcus said after an hour, wiping sweat with his sleeve. Different units, same sand. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact. Lost some good people over there. Taught me something about what really matters. Walt grunted acknowledgement, focusing on loosening a stubborn bolt. Thing is, Marcus continued, prejudice, that's like friendly fire. Hurts our own. I came back to folks calling me hero one minute, crossing the street to avoid me the next. He held Walt's gaze. Price of hate's too high, brother. For everyone. Walt's hands stilled on the wrench. The familiar surge of defensive anger rose, then subsided, leaving something raw and truthful in its wake. He nodded once, returned to work, but let the words sink in. By midday, the West Wing was half cleared. The sound of voices drew Walt's attention to the entrance. Simone had arrived with her security team and project managers, blueprints rolled under her arm. She moved carefully through the space, pointing out where clinic rooms would go, discussing ventilation needs. Walt kept his distance as required, but couldn't help noticing how she spoke to each worker, remembering names, asking about families. She reached Marcus and they shared a warm handshake. Her smile faded slightly when she registered Walt's presence, but she simply turned back to her plans, maintaining control of her space. The mediator, Sandra, appeared at Walt's elbow. Remember, 50 feet minimum unless in structured settings. Her safety comes first. Yes, ma'am, Walt said quietly, returning to his corner. Ruth arrived around 1 o'clock, carrying 2 large coolers. Lunch break, she called. Turkey or ham and the coffee's fresh. The crew gathered, forming a loose circle of chairs. Ruth handed out sandwiches with the same efficiency she showed at the cafe, treating Walt no differently than anyone else. Not cold, not warm, just fair. He sat slightly apart, unwrapping his sandwich when a familiar voice made him freeze. Well, if it ain't the cleanup crew. Dale Peterson stood at the fence, baseball cap pulled low. Heard you joined the Kumbaya Club, Walt? What's next, holding hands and singing? Walt's jaw tightened. Dale had been his drinking buddy for 15 years, the kind of friend who reinforced every bitter thought. That fancy lady better watch herself, Dale continued, voice dropping. Folks around here don't take kindly to being told what to do. Maybe this center needs a little lesson in... That's enough. Walt stood, sandwich forgotten. The old pull was there, the desire to laugh along, to belong to that angry circle again. Instead, he turned his back and walked away. His hands shook as he found Pastor Elaine's number in his phone. 20 minutes later, he sat in her office with his probation officer, reporting Dale's words. This could make things difficult for you, the officer warned. Your old associates won't like it. I know, Walt said. But I can't pretend I didn't hear a threat, not anymore. As Tuesday's light faded, Simone helped Ruth flip chairs onto tables in the empty cafe. Her shoulders sagged with the weight of the day. I'm scared, Ruth, she admitted, softly. Not just of him, of failing, of letting everyone down if this falls apart. Ruth turned the deadbolt with a solid click. Then we stand guard with you. Simone looked at her friend, this woman who had served coffee and comfort through decades of change, who had created a space where everyone could belong without losing who they were. She took a deep breath, and for the first time since Walt's attack, she felt something loosen in her chest. Not safety, not yet, but hope, small and determined as a seedling pushing through concrete. Ruth squeezed her hand once, then began wiping down the counter. No grand speeches, no false promises, just presence, boundaries, and the quiet courage to begin again tomorrow. The church hall smelled like coffee and floor polish on Wednesday morning. Pastor Elaine moved folding chairs into a perfect circle, each one exactly 3 feet from the next. She'd done this many times before, but today felt heavier. "Remember," the restorative coordinator, Ms. Thompson, said as she arranged name cards, "this isn't about making anyone comfortable. It's about truth and boundaries." Pastor Elaine nodded, smoothing her grey cardigan. "And safety first. Always safety." In a small office down the hall, Walt sat with his counselor, Dr. Martinez. His hands wouldn't stop shaking as he looked at his prepared statement. "I keep wanting to add but after every sentence," Walt admitted, wiping his sweaty palms on his car keys. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. "That's normal. The urge to justify comes from fear. But real accountability means standing in the truth without cushioning it." Across town at Ruth's cafe, morning sunlight streamed through the windows as Kendra stirred her coffee. She watched Ruth wipe down tables with practiced efficiency. "Dad rebuilt that ramp," Kendra asked, pointing to the new wooden structure outside. Ruth nodded. "Every morning at 6 he's at the center site too, working quietly. No speeches." Kendra's throat tightened. She thought of her son Tommy, asking about the grandfather he barely knew. "Working doesn't erase what he did." "No," Ruth agreed, settling into the chair across from her. "But change starts somewhere." The afternoon brought a different energy to the community center. Simone stood at a whiteboard, her neat handwriting listing services in simple terms. 20 volunteers sat in mismatched chairs taking notes. "Blood pressure checks on Tuesdays and Thursdays," Simone explained. "Transportation sign-up sheets by the door. Veterans can get counseling referrals right here. No forms, no waiting lists." Sarah, a retired nurse, raised her hand. "What about the meal boxes?" "Weekly," Simone said. "Basic staples, fresh produce when we can get it, and job retraining programs start next month." The room hummed with purpose. This wasn't just talk anymore. It was real help for real people. At the factory site, Walt's hands were covered in dust. He'd found an old brass plaque behind some shelving. "Veterans of Marshall County serving with honor." The metal was tarnished but solid. He sat on an overturned bucket, working at the grime with a soft cloth. Each circular motion felt like a prayer, though he wasn't sure he remembered how to pray properly anymore. Evening brought Walt to the community center's back room. 8 men sat in a circle, different ages, different colors, all carrying something heavy. "My name is Walt," he said when his turn came. His voice cracked. "I let pain become permission. I told myself that because life hurt me, I could hurt back." Across the circle, a man named James nodded slowly. "Pain explains," he said quietly, "but it doesn't excuse." The words landed like truth in Walt's chest. He drove home in silence, no radio, no justifications running through his head. For the first time in weeks, he slept without dreaming of running away. That night, the simple facts stood clear. Tomorrow would bring the first real circle. He would face what he'd done. No excuses, no running. Just truth and whatever came after. The church basement felt different at 8 in the morning. Wooden chairs arranged in a perfect circle caught strips of sunlight through high windows. Pastor Elaine and the restorative coordinator had placed boxes of tissues on small tables, along with water pitchers and paper cups. People filed in quietly. Veterans wearing their service caps. Seniors who remembered Walt from his factory days. Ruth, her cafe closed for the morning, sat straight-backed near the door. The room held its breath when Simone entered with her mediator, her simple navy dress and pearl earrings, a quiet statement of dignity. Walt came last, wearing a pressed white shirt that seemed too big for him now. His hands trembled as he took his assigned seat, careful to maintain the required distance from Simone. "We're here to speak truth and listen deeply," Pastor Elaine began, her voice warm but firm. "This is not a performance. This is not about making anyone comfortable. This is about real repair." The coordinator explained the rules. No interrupting, no blame shifting, no getting up without permission. Security waited outside, ready if needed. When Walt's turn came, he gripped his knees and spoke to the center of the circle. His voice came out rough, like sandpaper on wood. 3 weeks ago, I attacked Simone Brooks outside Ruth's cafe. The words hung heavy. I brought a flashlight as a weapon. I waited in the shadows. I hurt someone who'd done nothing wrong. He swallowed hard. I let old pain turn into permission to hate. I stayed silent years ago when others were cruel to her. And then I became the cruelty myself. Tissues rustled in shaking hands around the circle. Ruth's eyes never left him. I'm not here to ask forgiveness, Walt continued. I'm here to say what's true. I caused fear. I caused pain. I endangered something good for this town. His voice cracked. I'll accept whatever consequences come. I want to repair what I can, not with words, but with work that proves change is real. Simone sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. When it was her turn, she spoke with quiet strength that filled the room. I choose to forgive, she said, not because it's owed to me, but because bitterness is too heavy to carry. But forgiveness isn't trust. Trust requires time and proof. She looked directly at Walt for the first time. My pain is not your redemption story. My work here is about helping seniors and veterans who need support. I need guarantees of safety, not performances of guilt. Heads nodded around the circle. A veteran wiped his eyes. The wellness center will open, Simone continued. It will serve this community, and it will show that hate doesn't get to write the ending. The morning stretched into afternoon. At the renovation site, dozens of volunteers showed up with paintbrushes and cleaning supplies. Walt worked steadily, moving boxes and mounting shelves. He didn't try to lead or hide, just worked. Through the dusty windows, he saw Kendra's car slow down. His grandson's face pressed against the back window, curious. Walt's heart squeezed, but he stayed at his task, respecting the boundary she'd set. The car moved on. Ruth appeared with sandwiches and lemonade for the workers. She handed Walt his portion without comment, but there was something softer in her eyes. As evening settled, Simone sat in the new office, reviewing donor commitments and the opening schedule. Everything was falling into place. The medical equipment arriving next week, the volunteer shifts organized, the meal delivery routes mapped out. Walt carefully mounted the restored veteran plaque by the main entrance. The brass gleamed under the work lights, names of local servicemen and women stretching back decades. He ran his fingers over the edges he'd polished clean. Let this place do what I didn't, he whispered to the empty hallway. Let it heal. Dawn crept over the town like a gentle blessing. At Ruth's cafe, the aroma of fresh cinnamon rolls and coffee wafted through the early morning air. The space hummed with anticipation as seniors settled into their favorite spots, their eyes bright with hope. Veterans, proud in their caps bearing unit insignias and years of service, gathered near the windows. Ruth moved between tables with a coffee pot, her weathered hands steady and sure. Today's a good day, she said to each person she served, and they nodded, believing her. At precisely 8 o'clock, Simone Brooks arrived wearing a simple navy dress that spoke of dignity rather than wealth. No flashy jewelry, no entourage, just a woman who remembered where she came from. She paused in the doorway, took a deep breath, and stepped into the warmth of the cafe. Walt Harlan stood at the very back, almost hidden in shadow. His hands were rough from days of repair work, his shoulders curved with the weight of what he'd done. He watched, silent and still, as people greeted Simone with careful joy. "Friends," Simone began, her voice clear and strong. "This center isn't about me. It's about every veteran who carried our country on tired shoulders. Every senior who built this town with their hands and hearts. Every person who deserves dignity in their golden years." Pastor Elaine stepped forward, her gray hair catching the morning light. "Let us pray," she said, "for healing that doesn't excuse harm, for growth that comes from truth, for strength to build something new." The room bowed in silence, even those who rarely prayed. As morning melted into afternoon, the center buzzed with life. Seniors lined up at the new medical station, chatting with nurses about blood pressure checks and medication schedules. Veterans gathered around tables, covered with information about support services and job training programs. The veteran choir, dressed in pressed shirts and slacks, filled the space with harmony. Their voices lifted amazing grace to the freshly painted rafters, and more than a few eyes grew wet with tears. In a quiet moment, Kendra stood at the edge of the parking lot, her young son's hand in hers. The boy caught sight of Walt and waved. Just a small motion, tentative and quick. Walt's throat tightened, but he stayed where he was, accepting this tiny gift of recognition without demanding more. Ruth moved through the crowd with a tray of cookies, pausing beside Simone. "Look at all this good," she whispered. Simone nodded, watching an elderly veteran help a wobbling senior find her seat. Evening settled in like a soft blanket. The community room filled with the sounds of dinner. Plates clinking, quiet laughter, the comfortable murmur of people finding their way back to trust. Someone told a joke, and genuine laughter rippled through the room. It felt like healing, like hope taking root in cracked ground. Hours later, after everyone had gone home and the streets fell quiet, the peace shattered. The sound of breaking glass cut through the night. Dark figures moved in shadows, their hatred as visible as smoke. Spray cans hissed against walls, leaving ugly symbols of hate. A match flared in the supply room, catching on paper and cloth. The fire alarm's scream tore through the pre-dawn darkness. Smoke began to curl into the cold air, grey tendrils reaching toward stars that had witnessed too much hatred already. Walt ran toward the center in his old work boots and flannel shirt, heart pounding. But as he approached, he saw police cars already there, their lights painting everything in red and blue. The moment officers spotted him, he felt it. That snap of suspicion, that instant assumption of guilt. "Stop right there, Harlan," an officer called out, one hand moving to his belt. Walt froze, hands visible at his sides, watching smoke rise from the place he'd helped rebuild. In the growing crowd, he heard whispers. Had to be him, and knew he hadn't changed. And once a hater, always a hater. The smell of smoke mixed with something darker, the acrid scent of trust burning. Walt stood in the strange half-light of dawn, watching his fragile redemption turn to ash in the cold morning air. Dawn crept over the wellness center like a grey blanket, revealing the full scope of last night's destruction. Broken glass crunched under firefighters' boots as they cleared the last wisps of smoke from the supply room. Yellow police tape fluttered in the morning breeze, marking off areas where hatred had left its ugly mark. Walt stood at the edge of the parking lot, his heart pounding against his ribs. The center's windows gaped like wounded eyes, and racist symbols defaced the fresh paint he'd helped apply just yesterday. His cleaned veteran's plaque lay shattered on the ground. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the pale sky. Reporters clutched microphones and coffee cups, their voices sharp with excitement as they delivered updates to morning audiences. "Former attacker Walt Harlan is a person of interest," one reporter announced, her red coat bright against the building's smoky walls. "Sources say the restorative justice agreement may be revoked." Walt's phone buzzed constantly, with messages from his probation officer and Pastor Elaine. Online comments flooded local news sites. "Lock him up. We knew he hadn't changed. Once a hater, always a hater." The prosecutor arrived in a dark suit, his face stern as stone. "Mr. Harlan," he called out, "we need to discuss your agreement. This kind of escalation—" "Sir," Walt interrupted, his voice shaking but clear, "I need to tell you something important. But not here, not with cameras." Inside the police station, Walt sat in a small room with coffee gone cold between his hands. Shame and fear pressed down on him like lead weights. Then he remembered Dale's sneering face, those words about teaching a lesson, and the choice became simple. "I know who did this," Walt said quietly, "and I'll tell you everything." The sheriff leaned forward, notebook ready. "You understand what you're doing? These people were your friends. They'll see this as betrayal." Walt nodded. "I betrayed something bigger by staying quiet before. I'm done with that." For the next hour, Walt laid out the truth. Dale's threats, the regular meetings at the Rusty Nail Bar, the names of everyone involved in the local hate group. He described their planning sessions disguised as poker nights, their talk about taking back the town. "I'll testify," Walt finished. "Whatever you need." The sheriff's weathered face was grim. "They'll come after you. Maybe worse than legal trouble." "I know," Walt said, "but I can't hide anymore." By mid-morning, investigators had finished marking evidence. Simone arrived with her security team, her steps careful as she surveyed the damage. Her face held the same quiet strength it had shown after Walt's attack, but her hands trembled slightly when she touched the burned walls. Through the broken front window, she watched Walt working with other volunteers, hauling debris to a dumpster. No cameras followed him. He didn't try to catch her eye or make speeches. He just worked, his shoulders bent under the weight of what hatred had done to her dream again. Ruth appeared with coffee and donuts for the cleanup crew. She handed them out to everyone, including Walt, but her eyes were red-rimmed with tears. "My daddy built these window frames in 1962, she said softly. "He believed in making things that last." Walt stared at the splintered wood in his hands. "We'll rebuild them stronger," he promised. The day dragged on. More reporters arrived. Simone's board called emergency meetings demanding she return to the safety of her corporate offices. Donors threatened to pull funding. But Simone stood in the center's damaged doorway and said simply, "Evil doesn't get to win." As darkness fell, Walt climbed his porch steps, bone-tired from hauling debris. A white envelope lay on his welcome mat. Inside he found a single sentence: "Traitors get what traitors deserve." His hands shook as he reached for his phone. But he didn't run inside or pack a bag. Instead, he called the sheriff first, then Pastor Elaine. He turned on his porch light, pulled up a chair, and sat watching the street. Let them come, he thought. The truth costs what it costs. The Sunday morning sun hadn't yet cleared the old factory's brick walls when 3 sheriff's cruisers rolled silently into Dale's gravel driveway. Inside his ramshackle house, empty beer cans and hateful rhetoric littered the coffee table. The deputies found exactly what Walt had described: paint cans matching the graffiti, receipts for accelerant, and damning photos of the wellness center taken days before the attack. Dale's face twisted with rage when they led him out in handcuffs. "Walt's dead to us now," he spat. "Nothing but a traitor." But Walt wasn't hiding. He stood at the center, work gloves on, clearing broken glass while a group of veterans kept watch nearby. His shoulders were tired, but his conscience felt lighter than it had in years. Every shard he swept up was another piece of truth facing the light. Frank Martinez, a Vietnam vet who'd been quiet all morning, finally spoke. "Takes guts to choose right over easy, Walt." Walt just nodded, not trusting his voice. The simple acceptance in Frank's words meant more than any grand forgiveness. Across town, Simone sat straight-backed in her hotel room, facing her laptop, where board members filled the screen like a wall of worry. "This is madness," one director said. "You could have been killed." Simone adjusted her reading glasses, calm but firm. "We're installing security cameras, adding lighting, hiring local guards who know the community, but we're not running." "The liability," another began. "The liability," Simone cut in, "is in breaking our promise to seniors who can't afford medicine, to veterans who need meals and job training, to families who've lost hope." She leaned closer to the camera. "I didn't build this company by abandoning people when things got hard." The meeting ended in frustrated silence, but Simone had made her choice. Monday morning arrived raw and gray. Walt's hands shook as he entered the courthouse. The emergency hearing would decide if he'd lose his chance at the restorative program, if one good choice could outweigh his terrible one. The prosecutor stood first. "Your Honor, Mr. Harlan's proximity to these events proves he's unstable. The restorative option should be revoked." Walt's heart sank. But then Sheriff Cooper took the stand, his weathered face serious. "Mr. Harlan came to us voluntarily," the sheriff said. "Gave us names, places, evidence. Knew it would make him enemies, but did it anyway. That's not instability. That's someone choosing to make things right." The judge studied Walt for a long moment. "The restorative sentence stands," she said finally, "with additional supervision and weekly check-ins. Mr. Harlan, this second chance comes with even stricter expectations. Don't waste it." That afternoon, the community center's meeting room overflowed. People stood along walls, sat cross-legged on the floor. The air felt thick with questions no one quite knew how to ask. Walt didn't wait to be called on. He walked to the front, hands clasped to stop their trembling. "I did something evil," he said simply. "No excuses. No speech about being sorry. What matters now is fixing what's broken." He looked around the room. "This center matters. These people matter. If you want to help, show up tomorrow with paintbrushes and hammers. Actions speak louder than words." Simone rose next, elegant in a simple blue sweater. "Justice and mercy can exist together," she said. "But safety comes first, dignity comes first. This center will be a place of healing, and we will protect it." Ruth stepped forward then, holding up a clipboard. "Sign-up sheet for volunteer shifts," she announced. "Morning crew starts at 7. Hands raised across the room. As evening settled in, volunteers worked under portable lights. Fresh paint covered Hate's ugly marks. Walt helped hang a new sign near the entrance, its letters bold against the darkening sky. "Open tomorrow." He felt small next to the building's solid presence, but for the first time in years, he also felt real. No more hiding behind anger. No more letting pain poison everything it touched. Nearby, Frank and other veterans set up a card table with coffee thermoses. They'd be keeping watch through the night. Not with weapons or threats, just steady presence. Neighbor looking out. For neighbor. Simone stood at the edge of the light, watching the work unfold. When Walt passed by with another load of supplies, she didn't flinch away. She didn't smile either, but she nodded once. Acknowledgement, not forgiveness. It was enough. The evening's last paint roller smoothed over another scar on the wall. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, brush stroke by brush stroke, a community was choosing to heal. The Wellness Center opened its doors at 7 a.m. sharp on Tuesday morning. A line of seniors already waited outside, appointment cards in hand, their breath visible in the crisp morning air. Inside, the freshly painted walls gleamed under new lights, and the smell of coffee drifted from Ruth's cafe next door. Walt arrived before sunrise, his work boots quiet on the polished floors. Under the watchful eye of his supervisor, Mike, he fixed a stubborn Dr. Hinge and carried boxes of donated medical supplies to the storage room. His movements were careful, deliberate. A man who had learned to make his presence smaller, more considerate. "Blood pressure screening start at 8, he reminded an elderly veteran who wandered in early. His voice was gentle, different from the angry man who had stood in these same shadows months ago. The morning light strengthened, bringing more people through the doors. Veterans gathered around the coffee station, their military caps telling stories of different wars but shared understanding. A young nurse set up the free clinic area, laying out forms and sanitizing equipment. At 9:15, Simone Brooks entered wearing a navy wool coat, her shoulders straight despite the weight she carried. She paused beneath the restored veteran plaque, now polished brass catching sunlight, and took 3 deep breaths. Her hand didn't shake when she reached for the door handle. This was choice, not surrender, choosing to be present, refusing to let fear write the ending. The days began to flow into weeks, each one adding another small brick to the foundation of trust. Walt never missed his Wednesday counseling sessions, where he learned to name his triggers and choose different responses. Dawn found him at the center doing his community service, delivering meal boxes to homebound seniors, fixing loose railings, helping veterans carry heavy groceries to their cars. During the monthly restorative justice check-ins, he spoke honestly about his progress and setbacks. No grand speeches, just quiet truth. "I'm learning to see people, not projections of my own anger." Kendra started bringing Walt's grandson to Ruth's cafe on Saturday mornings. The visits were supervised, with Ruth keeping a protective eye from behind the counter as Walt read picture books in the corner. His grandson's small hand pointing at illustrations, Walt's voice gentle with wonder. These moments felt like miracles built from broken pieces. "The hungry caterpillar ate through 1 apple," Walt read, his finger tracing the words while his grandson giggled at the pictures. Ruth watched from nearby, her dish towel pausing mid-wipe, seeing healing happen in small moments. Simone's presence grew steadier too. She funded trade school scholarships for local kids, hired community members for center positions, and hosted weekly veterans' lunches where old soldiers shared stories over hot soup. The suspicion that had divided the town began to dissolve in the warmth of shared meals and common purpose. One ordinary morning, sunlight streamed through the cafe windows, painting golden squares on the worn linoleum. The usual breakfast crowd filled the tables, nurses starting their shifts, retirees with their crossword puzzles, veterans playing cards in the corner. Simone sat by the window, reading reports over her coffee. At a different table, Walt quietly ate his toast. Their eyes met briefly across the room. A simple, dignified nod passed between them. Acknowledgement without pressure, respect with clear boundaries. No cameras captured this moment. No news crews waited outside to spin it into drama. It was beautifully ordinary. Just 2 people who had found a way to share the same space without letting the past poison the present. Ruth watched from behind her counter, wiping the same spot over and over, her eyes bright. This was the real miracle, not a flashy headline or a dramatic reconciliation, but the quiet victory of a community that had learned to hold both accountability and healing in the same gentle hands. The morning moved forward. The cafe bell chimed as customers came and went. Coffee mugs clinked against saucers. Someone laughed at a shared joke. And in all these ordinary sounds lay the extraordinary truth. They had built something stronger than hate, something that would outlast the headlines and sound bites. They had built a peace that didn't require forgetting, only growing.